The wind hit the barn door so hard that Maya Hartwell dropped the hammer she was holding. It clattered against the wooden floor and rolled under a hay bale. She did not stop to pick it up. Outside, the sky had turned a strange shade of green, and the trees at the edge of her property were bending sideways, as if they wanted to lie down and hide. She had 5 minutes, maybe less, before the worst of it arrived. Maya pressed her palm flat against the barn wall and felt it shudder. The radio in the kitchen had said the storm was now a Category 5, the strongest kind, and that anyone who had not left the coast already needed to find shelter and stay away from windows. She had heard the warning 3 times that day. She was not going to hear it a 4th time, because she had already turned the radio off. She was not leaving. Not with 6 injured animals depending on her, and not with a hurricane bearing down on the only home she had left. Maya ran a small wildlife rescue on 11 acres of land near the coast, tucked behind a line of old oak trees that had survived storms before this one. She had a fox with a broken leg, 2 owls recovering from wing injuries, a raccoon that had been hit by a car, and 2 rabbits too young to survive outside on their own. All of them were in cages inside the barn, and all of them were terrified. She grabbed the last of the plywood sheets leaning against the wall and dragged it toward the largest window. Her arms burned. She had already boarded up 4 windows by herself, and her hands were raw from the nails and the wood. She did not care. She worked faster. A branch cracked somewhere behind the barn, loud as a gunshot. Maya flinched but kept hammering. That was when she heard something else. A sound underneath the wind, low and steady, almost like breathing, but much too large to belong to any person. She turned around slowly, hammer still in her hand, and looked out through the gap she had not yet covered. At first she thought it was a trick of the stormlight, shapes made from shadow and rain. Then one of the shapes moved, and she realized she was looking at an animal. A very large one. It stood at the edge of the tree line, half hidden by the swaying branches, watching her. It was a wolf, but it was bigger than any wolf she had ever studied in her years of wildlife work. Bigger than anything that should exist on this coastline. Its fur was dark, almost black, but there was a strange silver sheen to it whenever the lightning flashed. Its eyes caught the light too, and for one long second, Maya was certain the animal was looking directly at her, not at the barn, not at the food inside, but at her. She had spent years around wild animals. She knew what fear looked like on them, and she knew what hunger looked like too. This was neither. The wolf's stance was calm, alert, almost thoughtful, as if it were deciding something important. Then it was gone, slipping back into the trees as the rain thickened into a solid gray wall. Maya told herself it was nothing. Wolves did not live on this part of the coast anymore, not in decades. It had probably been a large dog, lost and scared by the storm, looking for somewhere dry to wait it out. She had no time to think about it further. The wind was growing louder by the second, and she still had 1 window left uncovered. She hammered the last board into place, just as the first heavy gusts slammed into the barn's east wall, rattling every loose board and sending a spray of straw dust into the air. The animals shrieked and squawked and pressed themselves into the corners of their cages. Maya moved from cage to cage, speaking low and steady, the way she always did, telling them the same thing over and over. You are safe. I am here. You are safe. She did not fully believe it herself, not with the barn groaning around her like a ship in rough seas, but the animals needed to hear it, and so she kept saying it, cage after cage, until her voice was hoarse. Outside, the wind reached a pitch that did not sound natural anymore. It sounded like something alive, screaming across the open fields, tearing branches from trees and hurling them through the dark. Rain came in sideways, finding every gap in the walls, soaking through her jacket in seconds. Maya checked the barn door one last time, testing the bar she had wedged across it. It held, but only just. She had built this barn herself 3 years ago, board by board, after she moved out here following the end of a relationship that had left her wanting nothing more than distance from people and closeness to something simpler. Animals did not lie to you. Animals did not promise to stay and then leave in the middle of the night with half your savings and none of your trust. Animals just needed you to show up, every single day, and that was something Maya knew how to do. She just hoped the barn would hold up long enough for her to keep showing up tomorrow. A crash sounded from somewhere near the house, loud enough to make her stomach drop. She could not go check on it now, Going outside in this wind was a death sentence, and she knew it. All she could do was stay here, in the barn, with the animals who trusted her, and wait for the storm to pass. She sank down onto an overturned bucket near the fox's cage, wrapping her arms around her knees, and watched the walls shake. It was during the worst of it, somewhere around midnight by her guess, though she had lost track of time completely, that she heard the sound again, the low breathing sound from before, except now it was closer, and it was not alone. Maya's head snapped up. Over the scream of the wind, she heard something scratching at the barn door, then another sound, and another, until it seemed like the whole door was alive with movement. Her first thought was raccoons, or some kind of storm-panicked wildlife trying to find shelter. She had seen that before, animals of every kind, converging on any structure that offered protection from a storm, instinct overriding every normal boundary between predator and prey. It happened sometimes. Deer and foxes sheltering together under the same fallen tree. It was not unheard of. But the sounds at the door were too heavy, too deliberate, to belong to raccoons. Maya stood slowly, hammer still gripped in her hand, though she knew it would do little good against anything determined to get through that door. She crept closer, straining to hear over the storm, and pressed her ear near the wood. Whatever was out there was large. She could hear the shift of weight, the scrape of what sounded like claws, and beneath it all, that same low breathing, multiplied now, as if a whole group of animals had gathered just outside her barn, seeking the only shelter left standing for miles. Lightning cracked somewhere close, lighting up the gaps around the doorframe in stark white light, and in that flash, Maya saw eyes, not one pair, but several, reflecting back at her through the thin cracks in the wood. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She backed away from the door, bumping into the fox's cage, and the fox let out a frightened yip that seemed to echo through the barn. The scratching at the door stopped. For a moment, there was only the wind, howling louder than ever, and the animals behind her rustling nervously in their cages. Maya stood frozen, hammer raised, waiting for whatever it was to either give up or break through. Then she heard a whine, not a growl, not the sound of something hunting. A whine, high and pained, the sound an animal makes when it is hurt and afraid and has nowhere else to go. Something in Maya's chest twisted at the sound. She had spent her whole life unable to walk past an animal in pain, and even now, with a hurricane trying to tear the world apart around her, that instinct did not switch off. She lowered the hammer slightly. The whine came again, weaker this time, threading through a gap in the storm's roar. Whatever was out there was suffering, and it was right outside her door, and every second she waited was a second closer to losing whatever chance she had to help. Maya's hands trembled as she reached for the bar across the door. She knew this was reckless. She knew that opening a door during a hurricane, to animals she could not identify, animals that might be dangerous, was possibly the worst decision she could make tonight. But she also knew that she had built this shelter to save lives, not to protect herself while something suffered 10 feet away. She lifted the bar. The wind tore the door out of her hands the moment the lock released, slamming it wide open with a force that nearly knocked her off her feet. Rain and debris exploded into the barn, and for one terrifying second, Maya could see nothing but darkness and water, and the wild shapes of branches flying past. Then the shapes at the door resolved into something else entirely. Wolves. Not one, not two, but a whole group of them, soaked and shivering, standing just outside the barn with their heads low and their eyes fixed on her. She counted quickly, the way she always counted animals on instinct. 11. 11 enormous wolves, larger than any she had ever seen described in any wildlife text, staring at her from the storm. At the front of the group stood the wolf she had seen earlier, the dark one with the strange silver sheen catching the lightning. It did not move toward her. It did not growl. It simply watched her, waiting, as the rain poured down around all of them, and the wind screamed through the open door. Maya's whole body told her to slam the door shut and bar it again. Every piece of training she had ever received about wild animals told her that 11 wolves standing at her door was not a rescue situation, it was a danger to her life. But then her eyes moved past the dark wolf at the front, to the smaller shape crouched near the back of the group. One of the wolves was limping badly, its front leg held at a wrong angle, blood mixing with rainwater along its side. It was the one whining, pressed low to the ground, clearly in pain, clearly unable to run much farther. And the other wolves were not attacking it, not pushing past it, not abandoning it to save themselves. They were standing around it, shielding it from the worst of the wind, waiting for her decision. Maya realized, in that strange suspended moment, that these animals were not simply seeking shelter. They were behaving like something else entirely, something that looked almost like a family protecting one of its own. She had never seen wild wolves behave this way. Not in any research she had read, not in any documentary she had watched. It did not fit anything she knew. The dark wolf at the front took one careful step forward, then stopped, watching her reaction. Its eyes, she noticed now that it was closer, were an unusual pale gray, almost silver, striking against the black of its fur. There was something in the way it looked at her that felt less like an animal sizing up prey, and more like someone waiting to be given permission. Lightning flashed again, closer this time, followed almost instantly by a crack of thunder so loud it shook dust from the barn rafters. The wounded wolf at the back flinched hard and let out another cry. Whatever caution remained in Maya's mind lost the fight to the same instinct that had built this barn in the first place. She stepped back from the doorway, pulling the door open wider, and gestured with her free hand, the same gesture she used every single day with frightened, injured animals who needed to trust her enough to come inside. "Come on," she said, her voice barely audible over the storm. "It's all right. Come inside." For a long moment, nothing happened. The wolves stood in the rain, unmoving, as if considering whether to trust a stranger who had just opened her home to 11 creatures large enough to kill her without effort. Then the dark wolf at the front turned its head toward the others, and one by one, they began to move. They filed into the barn in a tight, careful line, keeping close together, their claws clicking against the wooden floor, their soaked fur dripping trails of water and mud with every step. The animals in their cages went silent and still, sensing the sudden shift in the room, watching the enormous shapes pass by with wide, frightened eyes. Maya pressed herself against the wall to give them room, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. 11 wolves, now standing inside her barn, filling nearly every open space, their breath steaming in the cold, storm-driven air. The dark wolf came last, pausing at the threshold to look back out at the storm, one final time, before turning and stepping inside. As it passed her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from its massive body, it paused. It turned its head and looked directly at her, and Maya found herself unable to look away from those pale silver eyes. There was something there she could not explain, an intelligence that felt too sharp, too deliberate, to belong to any ordinary animal. Then it moved past her, and took up a position near the wounded wolf, standing guard, and Maya let out the breath she had not realized she was holding. She shut the door and dropped the bar back into place, sealing all of them inside together, 12 wolves and 1 human, and 6 frightened rescue animals, while outside, the hurricane tore the night apart. She had no idea, standing there in the dim lantern light with her back against the door, that the wolf with the silver eyes was not simply the leader of this group. She had no idea that she had just opened her home to a king. The wounded wolf whimpered again from the back of the barn, and Maya's attention snapped toward it immediately, her fear giving way to the same steady instinct that had guided her entire life. Whatever these animals were, whatever strange intelligence lived behind those eyes, one of them was hurt and needed help. That was something Maya understood completely, storm or no storm, wolves or no wolves. She grabbed her first aid kit from the shelf near the door, her hands finally steady again, and began to move toward the wounded animal, murmuring low and calm the same way she always did. "It's okay," she said softly. "Let me see." The dark wolf watched her every step of the way, silver eyes tracking her movement across the barn floor, and though every instinct told her this was dangerous, another part of her, the part that had spent years earning the trust of frightened creatures, told her she had nothing to fear. She was wrong about a great many things that night, but she was not wrong about that. The storm raged on outside, indifferent to the strange gathering taking shelter within the wooden walls of Maya's barn, and inside, 12 lives that should never have crossed paths began, slowly and carefully, to become tangled together in ways none of them could yet imagine. Maya knelt beside the wounded wolf, keeping her movements slow, and reached for the small flashlight clipped to her jacket. The wolf's front leg was twisted at a bad angle, and a deep cut ran along its side, still bleeding despite the rain that had soaked through its fur. She had treated worse injuries on smaller animals, but never on something this size, and never with 10 other wolves watching her every move. The dark wolf, the one with the silver eyes, moved closer and settled down beside the wounded one, close enough that their bodies touched. It did not growl at her, it did not show its teeth. It simply watched, as still as a statue, while she worked. "I need to clean this first," Maya said quietly, mostly to herself, though she found she was talking to the wolves as if they understood every word. "This is going to sting a little, I'm sorry." She poured antiseptic over a clean cloth and pressed it gently against the wound. The wolf flinched and let out a sharp whine, its paws scrabbling weakly against the floor, but it did not try to bite her, did not try to pull away completely. It held still, trembling, while she cleaned the gash as carefully as she could. Around her, the other wolves shifted and paced, their claws clicking against the wooden floor, their eyes darting between her hands and the wounded animal's face. She could feel the tension in the room, thick as the storm outside, and she understood without needing to be told that these animals were waiting to see whether she could be trusted with one of their own. She worked as fast as she could without being careless. The wound was deep but clean, no sign of infection yet, though it would need stitches if it was going to heal properly. She did not have the equipment for that, not for an animal this size, but she had butterfly closures in her kit, and they would have to do for tonight. As she worked, she noticed the front leg more closely. It was not broken, as she had first feared, but badly sprained, twisted from what looked like a fall or a hard blow. She ran her fingers along the joint gently, testing for fractures, and the wolf whimpered but allowed her to continue. "You're going to be okay," she murmured. "Just hold still a little longer." When she finished bandaging the wound as best she could, wrapping a strip of clean cloth around the wolf's middle to hold the closures in place, she sat back on her heels and let out a long breath. Sweat mixed with rain on her forehead despite the cold air in the barn. The dark wolf beside her let out a low sound, almost like a sigh, and lowered its head to rest gently against the wounded wolf's neck. The gesture was so tender, so unmistakably like comfort, that Maya felt something shift in her chest, some old assumption about animals and instinct cracking apart. She had read, once, that wolves in the wild formed deep bonds within their packs, closer than most people realized. She had never seen it firsthand, not like this, not with a leader pausing everything to comfort an injured member of his group, while a hurricane tried to tear the roof off the world. The storm outside seemed to grow even louder as the night went on, the wind finding new gaps to scream through, the rain hammering the roof so hard it sounded like gravel being poured from above. Maya checked each of the boarded windows again, moving carefully between the wolves, who parted to let her pass without so much as a growl. She noticed, as she moved through the barn, that the wolves had arranged themselves in a loose circle, the wounded one, and the dark leader in the center, the others positioned around the edges facing outward, as if standing watch. It was such a deliberate formation that Maya found herself staring, trying to make sense of it. Her rescue animals, tucked safely in their cages along the far wall, had gone eerily quiet, watching the wolves with wide eyes, but no longer shrieking or thrashing against the bars. Even the fox, usually the most anxious of her patients, had curled into a tight ball and gone still, as if it, too, sensed that whatever these wolves were, they meant no harm to the smaller creatures sharing the barn. Maya settled onto her overturned bucket again, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Her hands still trembled slightly from the adrenaline of the last hour, and her clothes were soaked through and cold, but she did not dare go back to the house, not with the storm still raging and not with a room full of wolves to watch over. She found herself studying the dark wolf again. In the dim lantern light, its fur seemed to shift between black and deep silver depending on how it moved, and its eyes, when they caught the light, held an expression that unsettled her more than any growl or bared tooth could have. It was watching her back, she realized, with the same careful attention she had given the wounded wolf's injuries. "What are you?" she whispered, so quietly she was not sure she had even meant to say it aloud. The wolf's ears twitched at the sound of her voice, but it did not move, did not react beyond that small acknowledgement that it had heard her. Hours passed in that strange, suspended way that only happens during a storm, when time seems to lose its shape entirely. Maya dozed off once or twice, jerking awake each time the wind found a new way to rattle the barn walls. And each time she woke, she found the dark wolf in exactly the same position, watching over the wounded one, watching over her. Sometime near dawn, though she could not see the sky through the boarded windows, the wind began to lose some of its ferocity. The screaming pitch dropped to something closer to a roar, and the rain, while still heavy, no longer sounded like it was trying to strip the boards from the walls. Maya allowed herself a small measure of relief. They might survive this after all. She stood to check on the wounded wolf one more time before trying to rest properly, and as she knelt beside it, the dark wolf shifted its position slightly, moving just enough to let her closer, without ever fully stepping away. The wound looked stable, the bleeding stopped, though the makeshift bandage had shifted and needed adjusting. As she reached to fix it, her fingers brushed against the wolf's fur, and for one strange moment, she could have sworn she felt something beneath the fur that did not belong there. A texture, faint and strange, like a scar left by something other than claws or teeth. She frowned, running her fingers along it more carefully, trying to understand what she was feeling. The dark wolf let out a low sound, almost a warning, and Maya pulled her hand back immediately, raising it in a small gesture of apology. "Sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to hurt her." The wolf's pale eyes studied her for a long moment before it seemed to accept her apology, some of the tension easing from its powerful shoulders. Maya sat back and wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of just how cold and exhausted she was. She had been awake for nearly 20 hours straight, first preparing the property for the storm, and now caring for a room full of wild animals that defied everything she thought she knew about wildlife behavior. She closed her eyes, just for a moment, listening to the storm slowly losing its strength outside, and to the steady, strange breathing of 11 wolves sharing her barn. Somewhere in that half-conscious state between waking and sleep, she thought she heard something that did not belong. A voice, low and rough, speaking words she could not quite make out, coming from somewhere near the wounded wolf. Her eyes snapped open. The barn was dim, lit only by the single lantern she had left burning near the door, its light casting long shadows across the wooden floor. The wolves were all in the same positions as before, silent, watching, unmoving. She must have imagined it. Exhaustion did strange things to the mind, and she had been through more than enough that night to explain a moment of confusion. Still, as she settled back against the wall, trying to find a position comfortable enough to rest in, she found her eyes drifting again and again to the dark wolf with the silver eyes, sitting perfectly still beside its wounded companion, watching her with an intelligence that felt, more and more, like it belonged to something other than an animal. The storm continued to weaken through the early hours of the morning, the wind dropping from a scream to a low moan, the rain softening into something closer to a steady downpour rather than a violent assault. Maya drifted in and out of uneasy sleep, waking each time to find the wolves exactly where she had left them, patient and watchful, as if none of them needed rest the way she did. When true dawn finally broke, gray light filtering weakly through the gaps around the boarded windows, Maya woke to find something had changed. The wounded wolf was sleeping peacefully, its breathing even, the bandage still holding despite the long night. The dark wolf, however, was standing now, moving slowly toward the barn door, and for one panicked moment, Maya thought it meant to lead the others back out into the storm. Instead, it paused at the door and turned back to look at her, a long, considering look that made her breath catch in her throat. Whatever this creature was, she understood in that moment that something between them had shifted during the long night. Some invisible line crossed that could not be uncrossed. She did not yet understand what that meant. She only knew, with a certainty she could not explain, that her life had changed the moment she opened that barn door. Outside, the hurricane was finally beginning to lose its grip on the coast, but inside the barn, something far stranger than any storm was only just beginning. By mid-morning, the wind had dropped enough that Maya could hear individual sounds again, instead of one continuous roar. Rain still fell steadily, drumming against the roof, but the terrifying scream of the hurricane had faded into something almost gentle by comparison. She unbarred the door just enough to look outside, and immediately understood the scale of what had happened. Her yard was unrecognizable. The old oak tree near the house had split down the middle, one massive half lying across what used to be her garden. Debris littered the ground everywhere, branches and leaves and pieces of things she could not identify, scattered as far as she could see. The dirt road leading to her property had become a wide brown river, water rushing across it in a steady current. She was cut off. Completely and thoroughly cut off from the rest of the world, with no way to drive out and, judging by the dead silence when she checked her phone, no way to call anyone either. Maya closed the door again and turned back to face the barn, and 11 pairs of eyes watched her return. The wounded wolf was awake now, lifting its head weakly when she approached, and Maya knelt to check the bandage again. The wound looked stable, no sign of infection, though the leg would need time to heal properly. She refreshed the water bowls she had set out for her rescue animals, and, after a moment of hesitation, filled 2 larger buckets and set them near the wolves as well. The dark wolf approached the water first, drinking deeply, and the others followed one by one, taking turns, in an order that seemed almost formal, as if rank determined who drank when. Maya watched, fascinated despite her exhaustion, cataloging every strange detail of their behavior, the way she had trained herself to observe any unfamiliar species. She noticed, as the morning wore on, that the wolves seemed to communicate with each other in ways that went beyond typical animal behavior. They exchanged glances that seemed to carry entire conversations, positioned themselves around the barn with clear purpose, and reacted to sounds outside with a coordination that reminded her more of a trained team than a wild pack. At one point, a particularly loud crack of thunder rolled through, and every wolf in the barn turned instantly toward the dark leader, waiting, watching for some signal before relaxing again. It was the leader who decided when the threat had passed, not instinct alone. Maya spent the day tending to her rescue animals as best she could, feeding the fox and the raccoon, checking the owl's wing splints, and refilling water for the young rabbits. Throughout it all, she remained aware of 11 sets of eyes tracking her every movement, cautious, but no longer hostile. By afternoon, hunger finally caught up with her. She had a small store of food in the barn for emergencies, but nowhere near enough to feed 12 large animals along with herself. She made her way to the door again, judging the storm had weakened enough to risk a quick trip to the house. "I need to get supplies," she said to the room at large, feeling slightly foolish for speaking to a group of wolves as if they understood her intentions. "I'll be back." The dark wolf rose to its feet immediately, moving toward her with a purposeful stride that made her heart skip. For a moment she thought it meant to stop her, but instead it positioned itself at the door, waiting, and she understood with a jolt that it intended to come with her.
"I don't think that's a good idea,"
she said carefully, though even as she spoke she found herself reaching for the door bar anyway. The wolf simply waited, patient and immovable, and something about the steadiness of its gaze convinced her that arguing would accomplish nothing. "Fine," she muttered, "but stay close. If anyone sees a wolf near my house, they might shoot first and ask questions later." She had no idea if the wolf understood a single word she said, but it fell into step beside her the moment she opened the door, moving with a silent grace that seemed impossible for something so large. The walk to the house was slow and difficult, the ground soaked and littered with debris, the rain still coming down steadily enough to soak through her jacket within minutes. The wolf stayed close the entire way, its body angled slightly to shield her from the worst of the wind, and more than once she felt certain it was deliberately walking on the side where the debris was thickest, taking the harder path so she would not have to. When they reached the house, she found the back door had blown open sometime during the night, rain and wind having turned her kitchen into a shallow lake. She waded through, grabbing what canned food she could find, bottled water, and a first aid kit far better stocked than the one she kept in the barn. The wolf waited at the doorway the entire time, watching the yard, its posture alert in a way that made her think of a guard standing sentry, rather than an animal simply waiting for its handler. As she gathered supplies, her eyes caught on a framed photograph that had fallen from the wall, glass cracked across the surface. It was a picture of her parents, taken years before either of them had passed, back when this house had still felt like a place full of laughter instead of quiet solitude. She picked it up carefully, brushing away the broken glass, and tucked it into her bag along with the food. When she turned back toward the door, she found the wolf watching her with an expression she could not quite name, something that looked almost like understanding, as if it somehow sensed the weight behind that small moment. They made their way back to the barn in silence, the wolf matching her pace exactly, staying close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from its body, despite the cold rain soaking through her clothes. Back inside, she distributed what food she could among the wolves, though it was nowhere near enough to properly feed a group their size. They ate what she offered without complaint, and she promised herself she would find a way to hunt or forage for more, once the worst of the storm had truly passed. As night fell again, the wind picked back up, not with the same ferocity as before, but enough to remind her the storm was not finished with them yet. The wolves settled into the same formation as the previous night, the dark leader positioned near the wounded one, the others arranged in a protective circle. Maya found herself settling closer to them than she had the night before, drawn by an exhaustion too deep to fight, and a strange sense of safety she could not fully explain. She had spent the night surrounded by 11 wild wolves, and had never once felt as protected as she did now. She fell asleep sitting upright against the barn wall, and sometime in the night, she felt something warm settle against her side. When she woke briefly, disoriented, she found the dark wolf had moved to lie beside her, close enough that its body blocked the draft coming through a gap near the door. She was too tired to question it, too tired to do anything but let her eyes close again, comforted by a presence she still did not understand. When she woke fully the next morning, the storm had finally passed. Weak sunlight filtered through the gaps in the boarded windows, and outside, for the first time in 2 days, the world was quiet. The dark wolf was gone from beside her, back in its usual position near the wounded one, watching her wake with those same pale, unreadable eyes. Maya sat up slowly, running a hand through her tangled hair, and looked around at the strange scene she had somehow found herself in. 11 wolves, safe and alive, sheltering in her barn, after a storm that could have killed them all. She had no idea what came next. She only knew, looking into those silver eyes across the barn, that whatever was coming was going to change everything she thought she understood about the world. The days that followed the storm settled into a strange, careful rhythm. Maya woke each morning to find the wolves already alert, watching the barn door as if waiting for something, though none of them showed any sign of wanting to leave. The wounded wolf grew stronger with each passing day, its limp fading, the wound along its side beginning to close cleanly beneath the bandages Maya changed twice daily. With the roads still flooded and no way to reach town, Maya spent her time doing what she always did best. She cared for the injured, fed the hungry, and slowly, without quite meaning to, began learning the individual personalities hidden within the group of 11 wolves sharing her barn. There was a smaller wolf, lighter in color than the others, who always positioned itself near the door, watching the yard with sharp attention. There was a broad-shouldered wolf, with a torn ear, who seemed to enjoy following her around the barn, curious about everything she did, sniffing at her tools, and watching her work with an almost childlike interest. And there was the dark leader, who never strayed far from her side once the sun rose each morning, though he kept a respectful distance she had not asked for, but appreciated all the same. She began, without fully deciding to, giving them names. It felt strange to think of them only as the wolves, especially after everything they had been through together. The curious one, with the torn ear, she called Finn, after a dog she had loved as a child. The alert one by the door became Owen. She did not dare name the leader, not yet, some instinct telling her that would mean something more than she was ready for. On the 3rd day after the storm, Maya ventured out to survey the full damage to her property. The dark wolf followed, as he had every time she left the barn since that first trip to the house, staying close but never crowding her. She found the extent of the destruction sobering. Half her fence was gone. The shed where she kept her tools had partially collapsed. The garden she had spent 2 years cultivating was buried under fallen branches and mud. It could have been so much worse, she said quietly, mostly to herself, though she had grown accustomed to speaking her thoughts aloud in the wolf's presence. At least the barn held. The wolf made a low sound in response, something between a huff and a sigh, and Maya found herself smiling despite the wreckage surrounding her. That afternoon, while she was clearing debris from what remained of her garden path, she heard raised voices coming from somewhere near the road. She straightened, wiping mud from her hands, and saw 2 figures picking their way through the flooded ditch that separated her property from the main road. Rescue workers, she realized, relief flooding through her. She had almost given up hope that anyone would reach this far out so soon after the storm. She turned to call out to them, then froze. The wolves. If rescue workers found 11 massive wolves sheltering in her barn, there was no telling what would happen. Fear could easily turn to violence, and even if it did not, questions would follow that she had no answers for. She spun around to find the dark wolf already retreating toward the tree line, moving with a silent urgency that told her he understood the danger just as clearly as she did. The realization sent a chill through her. These were not simply intelligent animals reacting to instinct. He had understood the threat the moment it appeared, and he was already protecting his pack from it. Maya hurried toward the road, waving to get the attention of the two rescue workers before they came any closer to the barn. They were a man and a woman, both wearing bright vests, both looking exhausted from what had clearly been days of difficult work. "You're alive," the woman called out, relief evident in her voice. "We weren't sure anyone had stayed out this far." "I'm fine," Maya said quickly, forcing a smile despite her racing heart. "My barn held up well. I've got some animals I'm caring for, but everyone made it through okay." The man glanced past her toward the barn, and Maya felt her pulse spike, but he only nodded, clearly too tired to investigate further. "We're checking on everyone along this road. Do you need any supplies? Medical attention?" "I could use some basic supplies if you have extra," Maya said, "but I'm managing fine otherwise." They handed her a small emergency kit filled with bottled water, non-perishable food, and a portable radio, along with instructions to stay tuned for updates about when the roads might reopen. Maya thanked them, watching with held breath as they made their way back toward the road, and continued on to check the next property. Once they were well out of sight, she let out a long breath and turned back toward the barn, where the dark wolf was waiting just inside the tree line, watching her, with an expression that looked remarkably like relief. "That was close," she said as she approached him. "We need to be more careful." The wolf's ears flattened slightly, an expression she was beginning to recognize as something close to agreement. That evening, as she distributed the supplies from the emergency kit, Maya found herself studying the wolves more closely than before, noticing details she had somehow missed in the chaos of the storm. Several of them bore old scars, the kind that came from more than simple accidents. One had a patch of fur that never seemed to lie flat, as if something had been removed from beneath the skin long ago. Another had a faint line around its neck, almost like the mark left by a collar worn too tight for too long. These were not wild animals who had simply wandered into her path. Something had happened to them, something that had left marks both visible and hidden, and whatever it was, it had brought them running through a hurricane to find shelter in her barn. She thought again of the moment the storm had first arrived, of finding the dark wolf watching her from the tree line before the others appeared, as if he had been scouting the area, searching for somewhere safe, before bringing the rest of his group. That was not typical animal behavior. That was leadership, planning, the kind of thoughtful decision-making she associated with something far more complex than instinct alone. Maya sat on her overturned bucket that night, the portable radio crackling softly with updates about road closures and relief efforts, and found her eyes drawn again and again to the dark wolf resting near the wounded one, whose injuries continued to heal steadily under her care. "Who are you?" she whispered, not really expecting an answer, not really believing one was possible. The wolf lifted his head and looked at her, and for one strange, suspended moment, she could have sworn there was something almost like sadness in those pale silver eyes, something that looked like the weight of a secret too heavy to share. Then he lowered his head again, and the moment passed, leaving Maya alone with her questions and the quiet hum of the radio, while outside, the flooded world slowly began to recede, and somewhere beyond the tree line, in territory she knew nothing about, forces were already moving that would soon bring danger straight to her door. 5 days after the storm, the wounded wolf's injuries had healed enough that Maya no longer worried about infection setting in. The limp was gone entirely, replaced by a steady, confident gait, and the wolf had taken to following Maya around the barn, much as the others did, nudging at her hand affectionately whenever she paused near its enclosure. It was on that 5th night, while Maya was cleaning her supplies by lantern light, that everything changed. She had gone to check on the wounded wolf one last time, before settling in for the night, kneeling beside it to inspect the healed wound, when she heard a sound behind her that did not belong. A low groan, deep and strained, coming from somewhere near the back corner of the barn where the wolf usually rested. She turned quickly, expecting to find one of the animals in distress, and instead found herself staring at something that made her entire body go rigid with shock. The wolf was gone. In its place knelt a man, his back to her, broad shoulders shaking slightly, as if the transformation had cost him something significant. His skin was pale in the lantern light, marked with the same kind of scarring she had noticed on the wolf's fur, and for a moment, Maya could not make a single sound, could not even draw breath properly. This was not possible. This could not be happening. She had spent her entire life studying animals, understanding the natural world in ways most people never bothered to, and nothing in that knowledge had prepared her for what she was witnessing now. The man turned slowly, and Maya recognized the eyes immediately, pale and silver, the same eyes that had watched her from the tree line during the worst of the hurricane. But this was not the dark leader. This was the wounded wolf, the one she had spent 5 days bandaging and tending, now sitting before her as a man with dark hair plastered to his forehead and an expression caught somewhere between pain and apology. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough, unused. "I did not mean for you to see this." Maya's hand flew to her mouth, and she stumbled backward until her back hit the barn wall. Her mind raced through explanations, each more impossible than the last, before finally settling on the only conclusion that fit everything she had witnessed over the past 5 days. "You're not just wolves," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. The man, still weak from whatever the transformation had cost him, nodded slowly. "My name is Cade," he said. "I owe you my life. All of us do. If you had not let us into your barn during the storm, I would not have survived." Maya's back pressed harder against the wall, her heart pounding so violently she could hear it in her own ears. Around them, the other wolves had begun to stir, several of them rising to their feet and watching the scene with careful attention, though none of them moved to interfere. "How?" Maya finally managed. "How is this possible?" Cade shifted, wincing as he moved his injured side, the wound still visible on his human form, in nearly the same place it had been on his wolf body. "It is not something I can explain quickly," he said. "And it is not entirely my place to explain at all. There are things about our world that are not mine to share." "Your world," Maya repeated, her mind struggling to fit this new information into anything resembling sense. "What does that mean? Who are you? What are all of you?" Cade's gaze flickered toward the front of the barn, toward the dark wolf who had risen, and was watching the exchange with an intensity that made Maya's skin prickle. "We are a pack," Cade said carefully. "A family, bound together by more than blood. We were attacked before the storm arrived, forced to flee our territory with no time to gather supplies or plan a safe route. The storm found us in the open, and we were desperate. Your barn was the only shelter within reach." "Attacked by who?" Maya asked, though some part of her was beginning to suspect she did not truly want the answer. "That is not something I can share," Cade said, his expression apologetic but firm. "Please understand, it is not that I do not trust you. It is that the less you know, the safer you remain. Our world carries dangers that have nothing to do with you, and I would not wish to bring that danger to your doorstep." "Too late for that, isn't it?" Maya said, gesturing weakly at the barn full of wolves, at the man sitting before her who had been an animal moments before. "You already brought your world to my doorstep. I think I deserve to understand what I've been living with for the past 5 days." Cade studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression, respect perhaps, or reluctant acknowledgement that she had a point. "You are braver than most humans would be in this situation," he said finally. "Most would have run the moment they saw what I am." "I don't run from things that need help," Maya said, some of her fear beginning to settle into something steadier, something closer to the determination that had guided her through every difficult moment of her life. "I never have. But I do need to understand what I've gotten myself into." Cade glanced again toward the dark wolf, some silent communication passing between them, before he nodded slowly. "There is much I cannot tell you," he said, "but some things you deserve to know, given everything you have already done for us." He shifted, sitting up straighter despite his obvious exhaustion, and gestured toward the dark wolf still watching from across the barn. "That one," he said, "is not simply our leader. He is Roman, and among our kind, he holds a position of significant authority. What you would think of, in human terms, as a king." Maya's eyes widened, and her gaze snapped toward the dark wolf, toward Roman, whose silver eyes met hers steadily across the dim lantern light. Something in her chest tightened at the realization, at the weight suddenly attached to 5 days of quiet companionship she had not fully understood until now. A king, she repeated slowly. Cade nodded. Our pack does not simply follow him out of habit. We follow him because he has earned that loyalty many times over, through decisions that protected our people, when others would have led us into ruin. He is the reason all 11 of us are still alive tonight. Maya looked back at Roman, still standing motionless near the front of the barn, still watching her with that same unreadable expression he had worn since the very first night. She thought of every small gesture over the past 5 days, the way he had shielded her from debris on the walk to her house, the way he had positioned himself beside her while she slept, the quiet protectiveness that had never once felt threatening despite everything she now understood about what he truly was. Why has he not shown himself? She asked. Why only you? Cade's expression grew more careful. That is not my decision to explain, he said. But I believe, given time, he will choose to speak with you himself. As if summoned by the words, Roman took a slow step forward, then another, moving with the same deliberate grace Maya had noticed in his wolf form. He stopped a careful distance away, close enough to speak but far enough to give her space, and Maya realized with a jolt that he intended to shift as well. Cade rose unsteadily, moving to give them room, and the other wolves shifted their positions too, forming a loose perimeter around the barn, as if standing guard over whatever was about to happen. Maya's breath caught as she watched Roman close his eyes, his powerful frame beginning to shift and change before her, bones and muscle rearranging in a process that looked painful, and yet somehow controlled, practiced, the movement of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. When it was finished, a man stood where the wolf had been, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair damp from the barn's humid air, and pale silver eyes that held the same unwavering intensity they had carried in wolf form. Scarring marked his skin in places, faint reminders of battles Maya could only imagine, and there was something in the set of his shoulders, the careful stillness of his stance, that spoke of someone accustomed to command. Maya Hartwell, he said, and the sound of her own name in his low, steady voice sent an unexpected shiver through her. Thank you for the shelter you provided my pack. I owe you a debt I do not know how I will ever properly repay. Maya swallowed hard, her mind still reeling from everything she had learned in the past few minutes, and found herself unable to look away from those familiar silver eyes, now set into an entirely unfamiliar face. You could start, she said, her voice steadier than she expected, by telling me exactly what kind of danger you've brought to my doorstep. Something that might have been the ghost of a smile touched the corner of Roman's mouth, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. That, he said, is a conversation we should have. But first, I believe introductions are in order. You already know Cade. Allow me to introduce the rest of my pack properly. One by one, the other wolves began to shift, the barn filling with the low sounds of transformation, until Maya found herself surrounded not by 10 wolves, but by 10 men and women, each of them watching her with expressions ranging from curiosity to gratitude to careful wariness. It was the strangest gathering she had ever witnessed, and as introductions began, names she would need to remember, faces attached to the animals she had spent 5 days caring for, Maya understood with growing certainty that her quiet, solitary life had just changed forever. The introductions took nearly an hour, though it felt both longer and shorter than that to Maya, whose mind was still struggling to accept the sheer scale of what she had learned. Beyond Cade and Roman, she met Finn, whose torn ear remained even in human form, a jagged scar along the edge that matched the mark she had noticed on his wolf body. He grinned at her with an easy warmth that immediately put her more at ease. There was Owen, quieter than the others, who nodded to her respectfully and thanked her simply for the shelter, his eyes still scanning the barn door out of habit even now. There was Derek, broad and serious, who studied her with open curiosity, as if trying to understand what kind of human would open her home to 11 wolves during a hurricane. Miles and Cole, who Maya quickly realized were brothers by the way they stood close together and finished each other's sentences, thanked her together, in near-perfect unison that made her laugh despite everything. Nolan and Grant rounded out the group of men, both quieter than the others, watching the exchange with careful attention, and finally, 2 women stepped forward, introduced as Vera and Nora, both of them offering Maya warm, genuine smiles that felt like the first truly comfortable moment since the transformations had begun. "You saved all of our lives," Vera said, her voice gentle. "We won't forget that." Maya found herself overwhelmed, not by fear anymore, but by the sheer weight of gratitude directed at her from 11 people she had known, until moments ago, only as animals. She had cared for them instinctively, the way she cared for every creature that crossed her path, never imagining the depth of what she was actually protecting. "I don't understand any of this," she admitted finally, sinking down onto her overturned bucket as the adrenaline of the past hour began to fade, leaving exhaustion in its place. "How is this even possible? What are you, exactly?" Roman, who had remained standing near the center of the group throughout the introductions, moved closer and knelt so that he was at eye level with her, an act that struck Maya as deliberately careful, as if he understood how overwhelming this all must be, and wanted to minimize the power difference between them. "We are what your stories have long called shifters," he said, "beings who carry both human and wolf natures within us, passed down through bloodlines older than most human records can trace. We live carefully, hidden from your world, because the alternative has never gone well throughout our history." Maya absorbed this slowly, her mind racing through everything she thought she knew about the world, all of it now cracked wide open by a truth she never could have anticipated. "And the danger you mentioned," she said, "the reason you were running before the storm even hit." Roman's expression darkened slightly, and Maya noticed several of the others shift uncomfortably at the question. "There is a rival faction," he said carefully, "that has long sought to expand its territory at the expense of packs like mine. They attacked our lands 3 days before the storm arrived, forcing us to flee with no time to prepare. We lost supplies, shelter, and nearly lost several members of my pack in the process." Cade, still nursing his healing wound, spoke up. "We were caught in the open when the hurricane began forming. We had nowhere safe to go, no territory to retreat to, and the storm was closing in faster than we anticipated. Your barn was the only shelter for miles." Maya thought of that first night, of the desperate whine she had heard through the barn door, of the decision she had made in seconds without fully understanding what she was risking. If she had not opened that door, if fear had won over instinct, all of them might have died in the storm. "Are they still out there?" she asked. "This rival faction, are they looking for you?" Roman's jaw tightened, and for the first time since he had shifted into human form, Maya saw something that looked almost like worry cross his features. "It is possible," he said. "We do not yet know if they tracked our movements before the storm, or if the chaos of the hurricane erased our trail. We have been cautious, staying hidden within your barn, hoping to avoid drawing attention, until we can determine it is safe to move on." "Move on," Maya repeated, and something in her chest tightened unexpectedly at the words, though she could not have explained why the thought bothered her as much as it did. "Once the road's clear, and it is safe to travel," Roman said, "we will need to find new territory, somewhere far enough from our enemies to rebuild what we lost. We cannot stay here indefinitely. It would put you in danger, and that is not a debt I am willing to add to what we already owe you." Maya looked around the barn at the faces watching her, at people who had been strangers, then animals, then strangers again, and now felt strangely, impossibly familiar after everything they had survived together. She thought of the quiet solitude she had built for herself after her last relationship had ended so badly, of the walls she had constructed around her life, specifically to avoid exactly this kind of complicated entanglement. And yet, sitting here now, surrounded by these 11 people who owed their lives to a decision she had made in a moment of instinct, she felt none of the familiar urge to retreat, to protect herself by keeping distance. If anything, she felt the opposite, a pull toward understanding more, toward helping further, toward whatever came next in this strange new reality she had stumbled into. "You don't have to leave immediately," she heard herself say, the words surprising her even as she spoke them. "Not until you're certain it's safe. This barn is sturdy, there's enough room, and frankly, after everything that's happened, I'd feel better knowing you made it somewhere safe, rather than rushing out before you're ready." Several of the pack members exchanged glances, clearly surprised by the offer, and Roman studied her with an expression she could not quite read, something between gratitude and genuine surprise. "That is generous," he said slowly, "more generous than we have any right to ask for. Are you certain?" Maya nodded, though her heart was pounding with the weight of what she was offering. The risk she was accepting, by extending her protection to a group who had already been attacked once and might be found again at any moment. "I'm certain," she said. "I don't turn away anyone who needs help. That includes all of you." The barn fell quiet for a long moment, the weight of her offer settling over the group, before Cade broke the silence with a soft, relieved laugh. "Well," he said, looking around at the others, "I suppose we have somewhere to stay after all." As the tension in the room eased slightly, conversation beginning to flow more naturally between the pack members, Maya found her gaze drawn again to Roman, who remained kneeling before her, watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken, in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice pitched, just for her, amid the growing noise of the others, settling in around them. "I do not offer my trust easily, Maya Hartwell. But you have earned it, many times over, in ways I am still trying to understand myself." Maya held his gaze, feeling something shift between them that she did not yet have words for, some connection forged through fire and storm and 5 days of quiet, unspoken companionship that had only just revealed its true shape. "I think," she said softly, "we're going to need to understand a lot of things, together." Outside, the last of the storm clouds finally cleared, revealing a sky full of stars that had been hidden for days, and inside the barn, 12 lives that should never have crossed paths settled into an uneasy, uncertain peace, unaware that the danger Roman feared was already closer than any of them realized. Over the following week, Maya's world reshaped itself around the presence of 11 shifters living within her barn. The roads remained closed for the first 3 days, as crews worked to clear fallen trees and repair washed-out sections, giving the pack time to recover fully from the ordeal of the storm and the attack that had preceded it. Maya used the time to learn everything she could about the people she was sheltering, piece by piece, story by story, until the strangeness of that first night began to feel like a distant memory, rather than her current reality. She learned that Finn had once been a healer within the pack's old territory, skilled with herbs and remedies that had nothing to do with modern medicine, though he admitted with a grin that her antiseptic and bandages had done a fine job on Cade's wound regardless. She learned that Miles and Cole had been inseparable since birth, their bond so strong that pack members joked they shared a single mind between 2 bodies. She learned that Vera had lost her mate years before, in a conflict with a rival pack, and that Nora had taken to watching over her ever since. A quiet, steady friendship that reminded Maya of the kind of loyalty she had always hoped to find but rarely encountered among people. And she learned, slowly, carefully, more about Roman. He was not what she expected from someone holding the kind of authority Cade had described. He did not demand attention or dominate every conversation the way she imagined a king might. Instead, he listened more than he spoke, weighing every word carefully before offering an opinion. And when he did speak, the entire pack fell silent to hear what he had to say. He worked alongside the others too, something Maya had not expected. When she mentioned needing to clear debris from her garden, Roman was the first to volunteer, spending an entire afternoon hauling broken branches and shattered fence posts without complaint, his sleeves rolled up and sweat beading along his brow despite the cool autumn air. "You don't have to do that," Maya told him on the second day, watching him lift a section of fallen fence that would have taken her an hour to move alone. "It is the least I can do," he replied, setting the debris aside and turning to face her, his expression sincere. "You gave us shelter when you had every reason to turn us away. Helping with your land is a small repayment for a debt far larger than that." Maya found herself smiling, despite her attempt to maintain some professional distance from the situation. "You keep talking about debts," she said. "I didn't open my door expecting anything in return." "I know," Roman said simply. "That is precisely why I intend to repay it anyway." Their conversations grew longer as the days passed, stretching from careful, guarded exchanges into something that felt more like genuine friendship, though Maya found herself increasingly aware of an undercurrent she could not quite name, a pull she felt whenever Roman's eyes met hers, a warmth that lingered long after their conversations ended. She told him about her parents, about the accident that had taken them both when she was in her 20s, about the years afterward spent drifting through jobs and relationships that never quite fit, until she had finally found purpose in caring for injured wildlife on this quiet stretch of coastline. She told him about the relationship that had ended 2 years before she moved here, about the betrayal that had left her wary of trusting anyone with more than the surface of her life. Roman listened to all of it without judgment, and in turn, he shared pieces of his own history, careful at first, then more openly, as trust between them deepened. He told her about becoming pack leader at a young age, thrust into the role after his father's sudden death, about the weight of responsibility that came with protecting dozens of lives, about the loneliness that often accompanied leadership, the way people looked to him for strength but rarely offered him the chance to simply be tired, to simply be afraid. "I understand that," Maya said quietly one evening, sitting beside him on an overturned log near the barn, as the sun set behind the tree line. "People expect you to always have the answers, to always be steady. It's exhausting, pretending you're never uncertain." Roman turned to look at her, something soft and unguarded in his expression that she had not seen before. "Yes," he said, "exactly that." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the colors shift across the sky, and Maya found herself acutely aware of how close he sat beside her, of the warmth radiating from him despite the cooling evening air, of the way her heart seemed to beat a little faster whenever his shoulder brushed against hers. "I have known many people in my life," Roman said eventually, his voice quiet and careful, as if he were choosing his words with great deliberation. "Leaders of other packs, allies, advisors who have served my family for generations. I have rarely met anyone who offers kindness as freely as you do, without calculation, without expecting something in return." Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks, unused to such direct honesty. "I just do what feels right," she said. "I don't think that's rare. I think most people would do the same, given the chance." "I disagree," Roman said simply, "but I am glad you see the world that way regardless." As the days continued to pass, the pack settled into a rhythm that felt, to Maya's quiet surprise, almost like a family living together. Meals were shared, stories exchanged around the lantern light each evening, and slowly, the wariness that had marked those first days began to fade into something warmer, something that felt disturbingly like belonging. But beneath the growing comfort, an undercurrent of tension remained. Roman insisted on posting watch each night, rotating pack members to keep an eye on the tree line, and Maya noticed the careful way he scanned every approaching vehicle on the now cleared road, the tension that never fully left his shoulders no matter how relaxed he appeared during their evening conversations. On the 7th night since the storm, as Maya prepared for bed in the small room she had cleared for herself within the barn, she found Roman standing near the door, watching the darkened tree line with an intensity that made her pause. "Is something wrong?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. Roman did not answer immediately, his eyes still fixed on the shadows beyond the fence line. "I do not know," he said finally. "It is likely nothing. But I have not survived this long by ignoring instincts that tell me to be cautious." Maya followed his gaze, seeing nothing but darkness and the faint outline of trees swaying gently in the night breeze. "What do you feel?" she asked. Roman's jaw tightened slightly. "Watched," he said, "as if something is out there, studying us, waiting." A chill ran through Maya that had nothing to do with the cooling autumn night. "Do you think it's them?" she asked quietly. "The ones who attacked you before the storm?" "I do not know," Roman admitted, and the honesty in his voice, the acknowledgement that even a leader as steady as him could face genuine uncertainty, struck Maya deeply. "But I will not risk your safety on the chance that it is nothing. Please, stay close to the barn for the next few days. Do not venture out alone." Maya nodded slowly, the weight of the warning settling over her like a heavy blanket. "Okay," she said, "I will." Roman finally turned to look at her, his expression softening despite the tension still evident in his shoulders. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I could not bear it if something happened to you because of the danger we brought to your door." Maya held his gaze, feeling that same pull she had noticed growing between them over the past week, stronger now, undeniable in the quiet darkness of the barn. "Nothing is going to happen to me," she said, with more confidence than she entirely felt. "Not with all of you here." Roman's expression shifted into something that looked almost like a promise, fierce and protective. "No," he agreed, his voice low. "It will not. I will make certain of that." Neither of them moved for a long moment, the space between them charged with something neither had yet named, before Roman finally stepped back, clearing his throat and returning his attention to the tree line. the careful distance of leadership settling back over him like armor. "Get some rest," he said. "I will keep watch tonight." Maya retreated to her small room, but sleep did not come easily. She lay awake, listening to the quiet sounds of the barn settling around her, to the occasional soft footsteps of pack members changing watch positions, and found her mind returning again and again to the warmth in Roman's eyes, to the fierce protectiveness in his voice, to the growing certainty that whatever was happening between them had moved well beyond simple gratitude. Outside, in the darkness beyond the fence line, unseen by even Roman's sharp senses, a lone figure crouched among the trees, watching the barn with cold, calculating eyes, before slipping away into the night to report what it had found. 2 more days passed without incident, though the wariness Roman had shown that night never fully disappeared. He kept the watch schedule in place, rotating pack members through the night hours, and Maya noticed he had taken to walking the perimeter of her property each morning before the sun fully rose, checking for tracks or signs of intrusion, before allowing anyone else to venture outside. Maya spent her mornings tending to her rescue animals, whose injuries continued healing steadily now that the barn had settled into a calmer routine. The fox's broken leg had mended enough that she began short supervised walks around the barn, and the owl's wings showed enough improvement that she suspected within another 2 weeks they would be ready for release back into the wild. Roman often joined her during these morning routines, watching with quiet interest as she worked, occasionally asking questions about her methods, about how she had learned to care for wildlife with such patience and skill. "My mother used to bring home injured birds when I was young," Maya explained one morning, carefully checking one of the owl's healing wing. "She never had any formal training, just an instinct for it. I suppose I inherited that from her." "She sounds like she was a remarkable woman," Roman said. "She was," Maya agreed, a familiar ache settling in her chest, softer now than it had once been, worn smooth by years of grief. "I still think about her every time I help an animal that reminds me of the ones she used to bring home." Roman was quiet for a moment, watching her work with careful attention. "I think she would be proud," he said finally, "of the person you have become, of the shelter you have built, both for the animals you rescue, and for those of us who never expected such kindness from a stranger." Maya looked up at him, something warm blooming in her chest at the sincerity in his words. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more than you know." Their growing closeness had not gone unnoticed by the rest of the pack. Maya caught knowing glances exchanged between Vera and Nora during meals, saw Finn's teasing grin whenever Roman lingered near her longer than strictly necessary, and felt her cheeks warm more than once under the weight of attention she was not entirely prepared to acknowledge. It was Cade who finally addressed it directly, catching Maya alone one afternoon while she was gathering firewood near the edge of the property. "He has not looked at anyone the way he looks at you," Cade said without preamble, settling into an easy stride beside her. "In all the years I have known him." Maya nearly dropped the armful of wood she was carrying, heat rushing to her face. "I don't know what you mean," she said, though the denial felt weak even to her own ears. Cade's expression softened into something kind and understanding. "Roman has carried the weight of leadership since he was very young," he said. "He has never allowed himself the luxury of caring for someone the way he clearly cares for you. It is a rare thing, and I do not think either of you should ignore it out of fear." Maya set the firewood down carefully, considering Cade's words. "It's complicated," she said finally. "He's a king. I'm a human who runs a wildlife shelter in the middle of nowhere. Our worlds barely overlap. And yet," Cade said gently, "here we all are, sharing your barn, sharing meals, sharing a life that has already overlapped more than either of us could have predicted 2 weeks ago. Sometimes the world finds ways to bring together what seems impossible." Maya did not have a response to that, and Cade, seeming to sense he had given her enough to think about, offered a small smile and continued on toward the barn, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the weight of the firewood she had gathered. That evening, after the pack had settled into their usual routine around the lantern light, sharing stories and quiet laughter that had become as familiar to Maya as her own heartbeat, Roman found her sitting alone near the barn door, watching the stars emerge over the tree line. "May I join you?" he asked, his voice careful, as if giving her an easy opportunity to decline. Maya nodded, shifting slightly to make room beside her, and Roman settled down, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, far enough to maintain the careful distance he always seemed to keep, as if unsure of his own welcome. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky darken fully, stars scattering across the darkness like scattered diamonds. "Cade spoke to you today," Roman said eventually, and Maya felt her cheeks warm again at the memory of their conversation. "He did," she admitted. "He said some things that gave me a lot to think about." Roman turned to look at her, his expression carefully guarded, though Maya could see the vulnerability beneath it, the same uncertainty she had glimpsed once before during their conversation about the weight of leadership. "May I ask what he said?" Maya considered how to answer honestly without revealing too much of her own uncertain feelings. "He said you don't usually look at people the way you look at me," she said finally, deciding honesty was the only path forward that felt right. Roman was quiet for a long moment, his gaze dropping to the ground between them, before lifting again to meet hers directly. "He is not wrong," he said, his voice low and steady despite the vulnerability evident in his words. "I have spent my entire life keeping careful distance from anyone who might distract me from my responsibilities to my pack. It has always felt necessary, safer, to keep my heart guarded." "And now?" Maya asked softly, her own heart pounding at the direction the conversation had taken. "Now," Roman said, reaching out slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, before his hand finally settled over hers, warm and steady. "I find myself questioning everything I once believed necessary. You saved my pack. You saved me. And somewhere in these past 2 weeks, I stopped seeing you simply as the human who offered us shelter, and started seeing you as someone I do not wish to imagine my life without." Maya's breath caught, her fingers tightening slightly around his, the warmth of his hand grounding her against the overwhelming rush of emotion his words had stirred. "I feel it too," she admitted quietly. "This connection between us. I've tried to tell myself it's just gratitude, just the strangeness of everything we've been through together. But it's more than that, isn't it?" "It is," Roman confirmed, his thumb brushing gently across her knuckles in a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. "Far more than that." They sat together in the deepening darkness, hands intertwined, the weight of unspoken feelings finally acknowledged between them, and Maya felt something settle within her that she had not realized was unsettled. A sense of rightness she had not expected to find in the middle of a hurricane's aftermath, surrounded by wolves who had become something closer to family than she ever could have imagined. "I know this is complicated," Roman said quietly. "My responsibilities to my pack, the danger that may still be searching for us, the differences between our worlds. I do not wish to promise you something I cannot yet guarantee I can protect." "I'm not asking for guarantees," Maya said, meeting his gaze steadily. "I'm asking for honesty. And you've given me that, every step of the way." Roman's expression softened into something Maya had not seen before, open and unguarded in a way that made her heart ache with tenderness. "Then I will continue to give you that," he said, "for as long as you will have me." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility, and Maya found herself leaning slightly closer, drawn by a pull she no longer wished to resist, when a sharp bark from Owen near the tree line shattered the peaceful stillness of the night. Roman was on his feet instantly, every trace of tenderness replaced by sharp, focused alertness, his body angled protectively in front of Maya, even as his eyes scanned the darkness beyond the fence. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice low and commanding, entirely different from the gentle tone he had used moments before. Maya's heart pounded as she rose slowly, watching as the rest of the pack emerged from the barn, alert and tense, gathering into the same protective formation she remembered from that first stormy night, except now she understood exactly what they were preparing to face. Somewhere beyond the tree line, eyes that did not belong to any of Roman's pack watched the sudden mobilization with cold satisfaction, before melting back into the shadows to report what they had confirmed. They had found the pack. And they were not alone. Owen's warning bark had been enough. Within moments, the entire pack had gathered near the fence line, shifted fully into their wolf forms, bodies tense and alert as they faced the darkness beyond Maya's property. Roman remained beside her for only a moment longer, before he too began to shift, his human form giving way to the powerful dark wolf she had first seen watching her from the tree line weeks before. "Get inside the barn," he said, his voice carrying even through the transformation, urgent and commanding. "Bar the door. Do not come out until I tell you it is safe." Maya's instinct screamed at her to argue, to insist on helping in whatever way she could, but the fierce protectiveness in Roman's eyes left no room for negotiation. She nodded quickly and hurried toward the barn, casting one last glance over her shoulder as she reached the door. 11 wolves stood arranged in a tight defensive formation, facing the tree line with a readiness that spoke of experience she desperately hoped they would not need tonight. Maya slipped inside and barred the door as instructed, her hands trembling as she moved to check on her rescue animals, who had grown restless at the sudden tension in the air. She pressed herself against the wall, near a gap in the boarded window, watching what she could of the yard beyond, her heart hammering with fear for the people who had become, in the span of 2 short weeks, far more important to her than she ever could have anticipated. For several long minutes, nothing happened. The night remained still, the only sound the quiet rustling of leaves in the breeze, and Maya began to wonder if perhaps Owen's warning had been a false alarm, some passing deer or nighttime creature mistaken for a threat. Then the tree line erupted with movement. A group of wolves, nearly matching Roman's pack in number, burst from the shadows with terrifying speed, their fur a mix of grays and browns entirely different from the coloring of Roman's pack. At their front ran a massive wolf, lighter in color than Roman, with cold amber eyes that even from this distance sent a chill through Maya's entire body. The two groups collided at the fence line in a chaos of snarling and movement too fast for Maya to fully track, bodies twisting and colliding, the sound of the confrontation filling the night air with a ferocity that made her press both hands over her mouth to stifle a horrified gasp. She watched Roman meet the amber-eyed wolf head-on, the two leaders locked in a fierce struggle that sent both of them tumbling across the muddy ground, while around them, their respective packs fought in smaller clusters, defending and attacking, with a coordination that spoke of long practice. Maya's mind raced, searching desperately for something, anything, she could do to help. She could not fight alongside them, had no training, no strength that could match what she was witnessing beyond her barn walls, but she was not entirely without resources. She grabbed the emergency flares she kept for wildlife emergencies, the kind used to frighten off predators threatening injured animals in her care, and moved toward the barn's side door, the one that led toward the section of fence where the fighting seemed most concentrated. This was reckless. She knew it was reckless. But she also knew she could not simply hide inside, while people who had become her family fought for their lives just beyond these walls. She slipped out the side door, staying low, moving carefully through the shadows toward a position that would let her see the fighting more clearly, without placing herself directly in the path of danger. The sounds of the battle grew louder as she approached, snarls and yelps of pain mixing with the sound of bodies crashing through the underbrush. She saw Vera go down hard, a larger wolf from the opposing pack pinning her against the ground, jaws snapping dangerously close to her throat. Without thinking, Maya raised the flare and ignited it, the sudden burst of bright red light and hissing sound startling the attacking wolf enough that it flinched back, giving Vera the chance to scramble free and rejoin the fight at a safer distance. The flare's light illuminated the scene in stark, terrible clarity, and Maya's stomach turned at what she saw. This was not a simple skirmish. Real injuries were being inflicted, real blood staining the muddy ground, and somewhere in the chaos, she lost sight of Roman entirely. Panic clawed at her chest as she searched desperately through the fighting bodies, until finally she spotted him, still locked in combat with the amber-eyed leader, both of them bloodied and clearly exhausted from the prolonged struggle. The amber-eyed wolf lunged, and Roman, moving a fraction too slow, took a vicious bite along his shoulder that sent him staggering. Maya's heart lurched, terror overriding every instinct toward caution, and she found herself moving forward without fully deciding to, another flare raised and ready. She ignited it directly in the amber-eyed wolf's path, the sudden burst of light and sound disorienting him just long enough for Roman to recover his footing and drive him backward with a powerful lunge of his own. The amber-eyed wolf's ears flattened, his attention snapping toward Maya with a look of cold calculation that made her blood run cold. He had noticed her, had recognized her as the human sheltering his enemies, and something in his expression told her that recognition had just made her a target as well. He shifted, transforming rapidly into a tall, hard-featured man with cropped gray hair and those same cold amber eyes, his voice carrying clearly across the chaos of the battle. "So this is the human foolish enough to shelter a broken pack," he called out, his tone dripping with contempt. "Did you truly believe you could hide them from me forever?" Roman, still in wolf form but clearly straining to protect her position, let out a warning growl that carried unmistakable fury, positioning himself between Maya and the rival leader with a speed that spoke of desperate urgency. The man, whom Maya realized with growing dread must be the leader of the rival faction that had attacked Roman's pack before the storm, smiled coldly at the display. "How touching," he said. "The great Alpha King, reduced to protecting a human pet." "She is not a pet." Cade's voice cut through the chaos as he shifted mid-stride, positioning himself alongside Roman with fierce determination, despite the fresh wound visible along his side. "She is under our protection, Damon, and you will have to go through all of us to reach her." Damon's cold smile widened, and he gestured behind him, where several members of his own pack had begun circling wider, clearly attempting to flank Roman's position and separate Maya from her protectors. Maya's heart pounded as she realized the danger of her position, exposed and vulnerable in a battle that had suddenly become far more personal, far more dangerous than she had anticipated when she first grabbed the flares from her supply closet. Roman, still facing Damon directly, let out a sound that was unmistakably a command, and the rest of his pack shifted their positions instantly, forming a tighter perimeter around both Roman and Maya, cutting off the flanking attempt before it could fully develop. "You will not touch her," Roman said, his voice, even in wolf form, carrying a authority that seemed to shake the very air around them. "This ends here, Damon. Tonight." Damon's expression flickered with something that might have been uncertainty, quickly masked by renewed arrogance. "Brave words," he said, "for a king who has already lost his territory once. What makes you believe you can protect anything tonight?" "Because I have something worth protecting," Roman said, and though the words were simple, the conviction behind them sent a shiver through Maya that had nothing to do with fear. The battle resumed with renewed intensity, Roman's pack fighting with a ferocity born of protecting not just themselves now, but the human who had given them shelter, who stood exposed and vulnerable at the center of a conflict she never could have anticipated joining. Maya, pressed against the fence post with her last flare gripped tightly in her hand, watched the fighting continue around her, with terror and determination in equal measure, praying desperately that this nightmare would end before anyone she had come to care for was seriously hurt, or worse. The moon broke free from behind scattered clouds, illuminating the battlefield in silver light, and in that light, Maya caught sight of Roman locked once more with Damon, both of them exhausted, both of them bleeding, both of them refusing to yield. Whatever happened next would determine everything, and Maya, watching from the sidelines with her heart in her throat, had never felt more helpless, or more determined to do whatever it took to protect the family she had found in the aftermath of a storm that was supposed to have ended weeks ago. The battle had gone on long enough that exhaustion was beginning to show on both sides, movements growing slower, breath coming harder, but Roman and Damon remained locked in their struggle with unbroken determination, neither willing to be the first to yield. Maya watched, helpless and terrified, as Damon lunged again, catching Roman across the flank, with a blow that sent him crashing into the fence post beside her. The wood splintered under the impact, and Roman let out a pained sound that tore at Maya's heart. But he rose again immediately, refusing to stay down despite the blood matting his dark fur. Damon advanced, sensing an advantage, and Maya, without fully thinking through the consequences, stepped forward and ignited her final flare, directly between the two combatants, the sudden burst of light and heat forcing Damon to flinch back and shield his eyes. "You cannot win this," she said, her voice shaking, but steady enough to carry across the clearing. "Look around you. Your own pack is exhausted. This fight has already cost you more than you're willing to admit." Damon's amber eyes snapped toward her, fury evident in every line of his face, but Maya held her ground, refusing to back down despite the very real danger radiating from the man before her. "You would do well to stay silent, human," he snarled. "I've stayed silent enough tonight," Maya said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her own voice. "I watched you attack people who never wanted anything but peace. I watched you try to hurt a pack that fled here seeking nothing but shelter from a storm that nearly killed them. That's not the behavior of someone who deserves to win anything." Around them, the fighting had begun to slow as both packs took notice of the confrontation unfolding at its center. wolves pausing their individual struggles to watch the exchange between Maya and the rival leader with cautious attention. Roman, still recovering from the blow that had thrown him against the fence, rose unsteadily to stand beside Maya, positioning himself protectively despite his obvious exhaustion. "Damon," he said, his wolf voice carrying a weight of authority that seemed to still the remaining chaos around them. "This conflict has already cost both our packs enough. Innocent lives have been risked tonight for a war that never needed to happen. End this now, and I will consider the debt between our territories settled." Damon's expression twisted with indecision, his gaze flickering between Roman's steady resolve and the exhausted members of his own pack scattered across the muddy clearing, several of them bearing wounds that would need days to heal properly. "This is not over," Damon said finally, though the conviction in his voice had noticeably weakened. "But you are right that tonight has cost us both dearly. We will withdraw. For now." He turned to gather his remaining pack members, casting one final, cold glance toward Maya, before disappearing back into the darkness of the tree line, his wolves following close behind, several of them limping from injuries sustained during the fight. The clearing fell into an exhausted silence as Damon's pack retreated fully into the night, leaving behind only the sound of heavy breathing and the quiet whimpers of the wounded among Roman's own pack. Maya turned immediately to Roman, who had shifted back into his human form the moment the danger passed, revealing the full extent of his injuries in the pale moonlight. Blood ran freely from the wound along his shoulder, and deep scratches marked his side where Damon's claws had found their target. "We need to get you inside," she said, already moving to support his weight as he swayed slightly on his feet. "All of you. Now." The pack moved together, helping their wounded toward the barn, and Maya spent the following hours in a blur of activity, cleaning wounds and applying bandages with the same steady focus she brought to every injured creature that crossed her path. Finn, despite his own injuries, assisted where he could, sharing what knowledge he had of herbal remedies that could speed healing beyond what modern medicine alone could offer. By the time the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, the worst of the wounds had been tended, and an exhausted quiet settled over the barn, the pack finally allowing themselves to rest after a night that had tested every one of them beyond what they had expected to face. Maya found Roman last, sitting quietly near the barn door, watching the sunrise with an expression of weary relief. She settled beside him, her own exhaustion catching up with her now that the immediate danger had passed. "You could have been killed tonight," Roman said quietly, not looking at her, his voice thick with emotion he seemed to be struggling to control. "Standing between me and Damon like that, it was reckless." "I know," Maya admitted, "but I couldn't just watch you get hurt without doing something." Roman finally turned to look at her, and the raw emotion in his eyes stole the breath from her lungs. "I have led my pack for years," he said. "I have faced dangers most humans could not imagine surviving, and yet nothing has ever frightened me the way watching you step into that fight frightened me tonight." "I'm sorry," Maya said softly. "I didn't mean to scare you." "You saved us," Roman said, reaching out to gently take her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles with the same tenderness he had shown days before. "Again. Just as you saved us the night of the storm. I do not know how to properly thank someone who continues to risk everything for people she barely knows." "You're not strangers to me anymore," Maya said, meeting his gaze steadily despite her exhaustion. "Not after everything we've been through together. You're my family now, all of you, and I protect my family." Roman's expression softened into something that looked remarkably like wonder, as if her words had touched something deep within him that few people had ever been permitted to reach. "Maya Hartwell," he said quietly, "I do not know what I did to deserve finding you in the middle of that storm, but I intend to spend a great deal of time making certain you never regret opening that door." Maya felt warmth spread through her chest, despite the exhaustion weighing down her body, and she leaned into him gently, resting her head against his uninjured shoulder, as the sun continued rising over the quiet, battle-worn clearing. "I don't think I'll regret it," she said softly, "not for a single moment." They sat together in comfortable silence as the pack rested around them, the barn finally settling into peace after the chaos of the night, and Maya found herself thinking of everything that had changed in the weeks since that first terrifying moment when 11 wolves had appeared at her door, seeking shelter from a storm that had threatened to end all of their lives. She had opened her home, expecting nothing more than to save a group of frightened animals from a hurricane's fury. Instead, she had found a family, a purpose beyond the quiet solitude she had built for herself, and a connection with a man who carried the weight of an entire pack's survival on his shoulders, yet still found room in his heart for her. In the days that followed, as wounds healed and the threat of Damon's faction settled into a wary, uneasy peace, Roman approached Maya with a proposal that would reshape both their futures. His pack needed new territory, somewhere safe to rebuild what they had lost, and Maya's land, with its distance from prying eyes and its proven ability to shelter them through the worst of storms, both literal and otherwise, offered exactly the kind of foundation they needed. "Would you consider it?" he asked her one evening, as they walked together along the repaired fence line, the autumn air carrying the crisp scent of the changing season. "Allowing my pack to make a permanent home here, alongside you. I understand it is a great deal to ask." Maya considered the question carefully, thinking of the quiet, solitary life she had built for herself after her last relationship had shattered her trust in permanence, in belonging, in the possibility of building something lasting with people who might one day disappear from her life without warning. But looking at Roman now, at the steady warmth in his eyes, at the family that had gathered around her through fire and storm and battle, she realized the solitude she had once craved no longer held the same appeal it once had. "Yes," she said simply, reaching for his hand and finding it waiting for hers. "I would consider it an honor." Roman's answering smile was the most unguarded expression she had seen from him since the night they first met, warm and genuine, and full of a hope neither of them had expected to find in the aftermath of a hurricane that had once threatened to take everything from them. The pack settled into their new home over the following months, building shelters and expanding Maya's property to accommodate their needs, while remaining hidden from the world beyond, careful and cautious as they always had been, but no longer alone in facing whatever challenges the future might bring. Maya continued her work with injured wildlife, her small rescue operation growing steadily, with the help of 11 new friends who had become far more than temporary guests seeking shelter from a storm. And each night, as the sun set over land that had once felt too large and too empty for one person to fill alone, she found herself grateful beyond words for the decision she had made that stormy night, the choice to open her door to 11 wolves seeking shelter, never imagining the family, the purpose, and the love she would find waiting on the other side. The hurricane that had once threatened to destroy everything had instead given her everything she never knew she needed, and as she stood beside Roman, watching the pack gather for another evening meal beneath a sky full of stars, Maya understood with quiet certainty that whatever storms life sent their way in the future, they would face them together, as the family they had become.